Hey everybody, Michael the Librarian of Magic here, finding and cataloging the magical and pointing you to it. I'm back once again with a roundup of all of the Disney original content for the week. This week being the episodes that came out on the 13th of December, Friday the 13th. Ooh. A Nightmare Before Christmas, if you will. And I watched all of the shows, got caught up on them, and I'm here to, with my handy dandy notebook, to talk about my reactions to all of the things. So these are spoiler filled as always, but I'll give you just the highlights of my thoughts on everything for the week. There was a new Sparkshorts Pixar short film this week, so they did finally add to that catalog, and the film is called Wind, which was created and directed by a Pixar animator named Edwin Chang. The short film is about a young boy and his grandmother who are they live in like a hole, like a chasm, and they're trapped in there, and they're on this little sort of island where like objects float around them, rocks and junk that they can they learn together how to rope those things in and create things out of them, and ultimately they're trying to build a rocket ship so that they can escape. And it's very touching and very sweet, as most Pixar films are. In the extra features of the film, there's a little documentary about the making of, which there has been with all of these Sparkshorts. And this one details how the idea behind it is that it's an immigration story. Edwin Chang wanted to sort of do a tribute to his grandmother, who was from Korea, and she made a lot of sacrifices so that she could get her family to America. And then Edwin, as a result, Edwin's was born in America, and his family has had opportunity here. So the film is really about those generations that come before us and the sacrifices they make to make us who we are, and the things that they give us, the things that they leave us with. Even though it is specifically an immigration story from the creator's point of view, I felt watching it that you can really layer on your own feelings with it, whatever you bring to it. It really just is about the people that went before you to help you help make who you are. I think the real nugget of the film is that no person is an island, and that we all have those people who have helped us become who we are, and that is told really nicely here. So that is the short film Wind, which is totally worth a watch. In Forky Asks a Question, Forky wants to know what is a computer, and he's helped by Trixie, who is brilliantly voiced by Kristen Schaal, Trixie the Triceratops. And this series just continues to be really hilarious and fun. And there's some great bits in this one where Forky has been watching British sitcoms with Bonnie's Bomb, so he's picking up all of these British mannerisms, and that's a funny aspect of this episode. So, Forky Asks a Question, great again this week. On the Marvel Hero Project, this week, a young man named Jaquil is highlighted. He lives in the south side of Chicago, and he has spearheaded a project over the last couple years of his life, giving what he calls these blessing bags to the homeless, which are things that'll he was inspired to give them things that'll last a little bit longer than food, like clothing and socks and things that we often don't think about but people really need, and that have sort of a longer term impact on people. And he got the notice of a lot of people, including Barack Obama and Steve Harvey, and a bunch of other people. He's been earning money for his charities and to help continue his blessing bag project and try to impact the homeless population in his community. And it's very inspiring, and he is an excellent young person. So that's Marvel Hero Project for the week. It was, as always, interesting to see the story of another person who's doing great things and who is in the future of our world. Disney Family Sundays, the craft of the week is a Cars inspired winter snow globe for the holidays, and they also have a special treat of hot chocolate in this one. They don't tell you how to make the hot chocolate, but they do tell you how to make the Cars snow globe. It's sort of less a snow globe and more of a snow scene, kind of like a ship in a bottle or a diorama in a bottle situation. But it's still really cool. You use the little car figurines and build the rocks and trees and dirt and snow and make it look all Christmassy and everything, and decorate it with Christmas decorations and stuff. And so that one's really cool. That would be another one I would probably consider doing myself, which hasn't always been the case with these. The other Christmas one I would probably consider doing as well, the Mickey and Friends ornaments. But yeah, Cars Winter Snow Globe. If you're a Cars fan, you'll probably find that one pretty cool. Or if you just want something to do for the holidays, this tells you how to do it. The Imagineering Story, this week's episode was called To Infinity and Beyond, and I'm pretty sure that this is the last segment of this documentary piece, The Imagineering Story. I think it's done at this point. This one highlights what's going on now, the building of Shanghai Disney in 2013, as well as there's a big chunk of this episode is about Shanghai Disney, about how they made pirates over there totally different, and how they worked with the cultures and cultural experts to make things that would be a lot more fitting and appealing for the Chinese audience. They went with Tron, the Tron Light Cycle ride in Shanghai Disney and their Tomorrowland, as opposed to some sort of a Space Mountain update. We're going to be getting that Tron Light Cycle ride, or a version of it, in Walt Disney World, Florida next year, something like that. They use these great tile mosaics to incorporate the like Disney characters that would symbolize the signs of the Chinese zodiac. So like Mushu is the dragon, and Thumper is a rabbit, and so on and so on. They talked about how the castle there is like the biggest castle on any Disney property, and all the things they wanted to do to make that impressive and impactful for the Chinese people in particular. And then they also talked about the building of the Avatar World of Pandora at Animal Kingdom, and all the challenges that went into that, trying to create floating islands and all of these things that are super impressive. And then they also talked about adapting the Hollywood Tower of Terror at Disney's California Adventure into Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout. And one of the things that highlights, as well as other episodes of this documentary, is the balance that Imagineers and the Disney company have to face in looking towards the future and updating their properties and making sure they're fresh, but also respecting the tradition and respecting that people love the traditional elements of those things, but not being too dear with the tradition, not being totally unwilling to change it or update it or things like that. And it's an interesting challenge, and they do highlight that in these episodes. So overall, if this is over, and I think it is, I think they did do a good job with this documentary in the end. There were a few episodes that were unbalanced or out of sync, but viewed as an entire piece, a 6-part piece, or like a 6-hour long documentary, I think it does work as one whole thing. And that's probably how they shot it and edited it, and then they were forced to chunk it up. I don't think this was ever meant to be serialized in the first place, but that was a decision that Disney made when they were unveiling Disney Plus, and it doesn't not work in an episodic format. As long as you're willing to, watch each one and then ultimately consider it as a piece. And if you do, I think it does work. They do manage to bring it home and, fixate on the history and story of the Imagineers, and it really does work, and I really did enjoy it. So if you haven't watched any of these and you're somebody who's interested in seeing the technical aspects of the Disney parks and Disney in general, how some of these things work, even though you may want more detail in certain aspects and you may want less detail about certain things, I think you'll still be very interested and fairly rewarded by this documentary. High School Musical, the musical, the series this week. The episode was called What Team? And basically it's the fallout of everything that's been building up going on with Miss Jen it's found out that she's not actually an accredited teacher. She got her teaching certificate from some obscure online university, and she's not legit. She's lied about her last name because in her words, is ashamed of, um, not having accomplished as much as she thought she would, and all this stuff. But this show goes to show during when you're in the middle of a musical, there's no problem that can't be fixed by a song and a dance, and this episode has that. She has a hearing, which is sort of if you accept all the ridiculous things that are going on in the show, and it's a High School Musical tongue-in-cheek satire, you should. Then it all works. The song and dance thing works in this weird mock hearing, and all that goes according to plan. Also, there's all the love triangles are developing. Ricky's dad is still sweet on Miss Jin, and that's coming along. Ricky seems to be getting closer to Gina, which is a little bit of a surprise, and EJ is admitting all of his wrongs to Nini. He's finally been able to talk to her and admit where he was wrong, and they're not together, but they're on better terms than they were. But the EJ, Nini, Ricky, Gina thing is turning into a love quadrangle, square, whatever you want to call it, rectangle. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. That's really kind of the heart of the show. But yeah, this was a fine episode. The song at the end and the dance were actually really good. Some of the better group number situations that they've had in this show so far. Ricky sings a song to Gina that he wrote that is really good. And so there's some good music in this one as well. It's the people who write the music and do the choreography for this show are pretty impressive, I think, to have the task of sort of putting together fresh songs and dances in each episode and everything like that. But they are pulling that off pretty well. So the thing that makes this show really charming is it knows so much what it is, and it leans into that so hard. It knows that it's a satire. It's super self-aware. It's super tongue-in-cheek, and it is super duper cheesy. The show is super duper corny, but it really, really works because the people who are making this really know what it is. And it, as a result, where in other shows it would kind of come off as like, why is this even happening? In this show, it is super charming and appealing. A lot of that credit goes to the actors as well, but yeah, this show is, it's not going to be for everybody. It's a corny teen drama, comedy, musical thing. But for what they're trying to accomplish, for what they're trying to do, it really works. It's hard to say that it's failing at what they are attempting to accomplish. So, what team? Great funny moments and good music in this week's episode. This week's episode of Encore features a cast from Snellville, Georgia from 1991, remounting a production of Oklahoma. And there's some interesting problems that this cast has to face in this episode that other casts haven't had to do. Primarily that the two leads that play the two female leads. So Oklahoma has a love triangle at the heart of it, and there are two female leads. They're not a love triangle really, but like multiple relationships, I should say. And there are like a couple male leads and a couple female leads. And the two original female leads are not returning to participate in Encore, so they pretty much have to recast the entire show with the people that did show up. That is a really interesting challenge. The other episodes pretty much had like whatever their parts were, they pretty much already had it. They didn't have to re-audition for it. The last episode kind of had a little bit of a thing, but it didn't ultimately end up in a recast. This one, they had to pretty much recast the whole show from top to bottom with the people that did participate. Another interesting focus or highlight of the show is since they were in high school, one of the principal members, this guy named Woody, who was one of the male leads in the show, was in a hit-and-run car accident and lost the use of his legs, and he has to use a wheelchair now. And there's a lot of interesting things about him going back to reprise his role, and choreographing and everything, adapting everything so that he can use his wheelchair in the show and stuff like that. And there's a lot of cool stuff about that. He was a very gifted tap dancer before he was involved in his accident, and as a result, he still has all of these great rhythmic skills. He's very fit, strong person, so he's able to adapt really well. They also bring in a person called Ali Stroker at one point. She's a Tony Award winning actress and performer on Broadway who also happens to be in a wheelchair. And he got to meet her, and she got to briefly talk with him about some of the things that are challenges, but also some of the things that are unique that a performer who is in a wheelchair can bring to a musical production that other performers can't do because they're not in wheelchairs and things like that. The unique challenges of adapting it, but also the advantages that go with it as well. And she's a gifted actress. Like I said, she's won Tonys that was able to help him boost his confidence a little bit by meeting him. So that was a cool aspect. Also, there's not a ton of drama. There's some interesting background stuff that's more of like people facing their own personal things, getting recast in certain roles. The two people who end up being cast in the leads of this show are married to each other. They were high school sweethearts and ended up getting married. So that's an interesting aspect. One of the guys who has one of the roles in the show is recovering alcoholic and drug addict, and he talks about how he's had to deal with issues in the past and how he's been overcoming those and stuff. So there's all of these personal issues, but this was a pretty good episode and interesting in that there wasn't a lot of ego getting in the way in this one, and I'm personally for that. I think it's really hard to put on a show, period, when there's a lot of ego involved, and there's a lot of stories and documentaries and stuff about ego in theater out there. But it's even harder when you have to mount a show in 5 days to set those things aside. There are disappointments. There are people who didn't get roles that they wanted and things like that. But these are people who are really good at setting their ego aside for the sake of the production, and they put on a really good show. There's a lot of talent in this cast, and Oklahoma's a fun show to do, and they do a really good job with it. So that's Encore this week. The World According to Jeff Goldblum. Jeff investigates the world of gaming. He primarily wants to understand the appeal of video gaming, and goes to a lot of places. He goes to a competitive Counter-Strike tournament, and one interesting segment is he goes to a LARPing session. Like, there's these people, I think they're in California, that do like pretty serious storytelling based LARPing, which if you're unfamiliar with LARPing is live action role playing. Is where people dress up in costume and fully embody their characters to tell a story, but also you're also playing a role playing game in which you are fighting each other with weaponry and that sort of stuff, and there are experiences and points assigned and all this kind of stuff. It's very complicated. Well, I shouldn't say complicated, but it's a very complex world that and hobby that people engage in. And Jeff goes there to sort of see if he can understand just what we like about games and what we like about participating, and that sort of the LARPing aspect is a lot more in his wheelhouse than video gaming, because there's some acting involved with live action role playing, because you are playing a role, and he does get to take on a role, and that's really kind of a fun aspect of this episode. Probably my favorite segment of it. But yeah, he just kind of goes on a quest to discover what's appealing about video gaming. He's not a heavy gamer himself, but he wants to know more about that world. So there's a lot of cool things that go in and out of it. He investigates VR, a whole bunch of other stuff. If that's a topic you're interested in, there's some cool stuff in here that you may not have known about. And, of course, Jeff Goldblum. So that's that for this week. And then finally, there was a new One Day at Disney short. I was kind of wondering about this last week when I made a video last week, because they made a 1-hour documentary, and then they also had a section for shorts, but there was only one short in there, and the short there was just the segment that was lifted straight out of the documentary. So I was a little confused whether they were going to add to these or not, or what's the purpose of that. Well, it turns out they are adding to it, so it's not just some weird thing. And this week they did add another 5-minute short on there about a man named Tom Self, who is a machinist and scuba diver at Disneyland in California. He was in the Navy. He learned how to dive and work on machinery in the Navy, and now puts those skills to work working on all the aquatic stuff at Disneyland. He helps make sure the rides and attractions are in top shape for the guests every day. So he has to go in really late at night, or like 1:30 or 2 in the morning, to dive down into like the Finding Nemo submarine area, or the Jungle Cruise, or Splash Mountain, or those, to make sure everything's in working order. And he gets to talk a little bit about what he loves about his job and what the unique challenges are of that. And it's a really interesting segment, actually, if you've ever kind of wondered how they maintain those, how much work is involved, what makes those tick. You get a little bit of a glimpse in this short episode of One Day at Disney. So that was really cool. I'm glad that they're going to keep adding to those, and that was interesting to see. I actually really enjoyed the documentary, and if they just keep adding to these and we see more and more of what various people do in their jobs for Disney, that is really interesting to me and really cool just to see what some of these people do and all the many, many, many people it takes to, make all these things work. So that was really interesting, and I was glad they added it on there. So that, I think, are all of the originals this week, the Disney Plus stuff for this week. I will be back next week with another episode of giving my reviews and reactions and just in general impressions about all of that stuff for the week of the 20th of December, Friday the 20th. And sometime after the 20th, I'll be on here talking about my thoughts and impressions. I don't know how long that'll take, given that the holidays will be following that week. It just sort of depends on my plans, whatever. Anyway, thanks as always for watching these. If you have any thoughts of your own, give me a comment down below. Thanks for commenting and subscribing, giving me a thumbs up and all that good stuff. And I'll see you again next week. I hope you have a really excellent week, a magical week, and we'll see you in the next video. Until then, bye-bye.